Aries just loves to act like jealousy is completely beneath them. Like they're too bold and too busy conquering the world to bother with something so weak. But the truth shows the moment someone else gets attention they thought was guaranteed to them. Because you see, Aries builds their whole identity on being the one you notice first and keep noticing without them having to earn it every single day. So when jealousy hits, it hits in that exact place they pretend it doesn't even exist. It's the fear that someone else managed to be far more impressive, more wanted, and more magnetic than Aries could ever be. And guess what? Aries doesn't experience that as insecurity. They actually experience it as an insult. Because in their mind, this was never supposed to be a competition in the first place, because they always see themselves as the winner. So jealousy is basically that shock that their self-appointed primacy isn't as unquestioned as they believed. And that irritation they throw around, that sudden sharpness, that's just Aries trying to cover the panic that someone else managed to matter far more than them for even half a freaking second. And Aries is the sign that will try their whole lives not to show this. Because you see, Aries doesn't process jealousy like a normal emotional reaction. They process it like someone just challenged their entire self-definition, and that's exactly why it hits so hard. Because you see, the second they feel replaced or sidelined, their mind doesn't go to insecurity. It goes straight into this internal, who the hell do they think they are? Because Aries has this story in their head where they're supposed to be the one everyone gravitates towards automatically. And when that story cracks, and it does crack sometimes, they will not feel sad like some other signs. They will actually feel very offended because jealousy is the proof that their impact wasn't as absolute as they assumed, and that humiliation is something they're allergic to admitting. Because you see, Aries has this built-in belief that if they show up, they should already matter the most. And when reality contradicts that fantasy, their entire internal system scrambles to restore that fantasy. They don't ignore jealousy. They immediately reinterpret it so it doesn't make them look weak, because Aries hates weakness. They just can't tolerate the idea that someone else could have more influence than they do, so their brain rewrites everything into a competitive frame even when nothing competitive is actually happening. And they don't give a shit if it's irrational. Their pride needs a target, and jealousy always gives them one. Once that internal competition switches on, their whole logic gets super loud and super dramatic, and they start convincing themselves that they knew this would happen, that they should have expected this, that they let their guard down, even though 5 minutes ago they thought they were completely untouchable. And you see, jealousy attacks them in one place that matters the most for them. It's their identity. Aries is built on momentum and on confidence, so when jealousy slows them down or makes them hesitate, it feels like a personal failure. Because they suddenly feel reactive instead of dominant, which is horrible for an Aries, and that alone is enough to irritate them into a whole internal rant. They basically need to believe that they're the one who sets the pace, they're the one who chooses, they're the one who is chosen, and jealousy completely scrambles that. Because now they're waiting for your response instead of dictating the next move. And trust me when I say this, nothing destabilizes Aries faster than feeling like someone else is controlling the emotional tempo. And inside, it's a mess of agitation and ego maintenance. So they start replaying conversations, they start observing tiny details, scanning for clues that they missed a threat because they were too comfortable. Aries will mentally build an entire crazy story about why this person is a competition, why you allowed it, and why they have to react now. Guess what? This is not paranoia. It's actually their crazy pride trying to reassert dominance. And the funniest part is that half of the time, the jealousy wasn't even triggered by anything concrete. It's just Aries sensed a shift in attention and immediately took it personally because attention is super important to them. And losing it, even just a tiny bit of attention, it feels completely personal. Because underneath all that bravado, jealousy actually forces Aries to confront something they would rather never admit. And that's that they actually do need reassurance. Because you see, Aries desperately wants to believe that they're self-sufficient, that they don't rely on anyone for emotional stability, but jealousy exposes just how dependent they actually are on feeling wanted, admired, and prioritized. It basically shows them that they're not as invincible as they pretend because they're not a sign who can tolerate feeling exposed. They convert vulnerability into anger as fast as possible. So when Aries gets jealous, the internal mechanism is never romantic or sentimental. It's Aries trying to rebuild a version of themselves where they're still the strongest, still the one who matters the most, and still the one who no one dares to overlook. And of course, the more threatened they feel, the louder they get. And they'll continue insisting that they're just being direct, but you will know it's not true. Because you see, Aries just loves to pretend they barely notice jealousy. But they absolutely do. Because the second they get jealous, they get that very sharp, very irritated edge in their voice. You know, the one they insist is just how I talk. But the flip side is that they actually hate that it happens this fast. But jealousy always throws them straight into that defensive territory. It always starts with that kind of territorial tone. You know, the abrupt questions, the way they demand context for things that were completely irrelevant. Aries calls it being direct. However, everyone else who is not an Aries calls it exactly as it is. It's just jealousy lighting up their ego. And it agitates them. It speeds them up. It makes them talk way faster, breathe harder, and suddenly they're watching you with the intensity of someone convinced you're hiding an entire double life, even when you're not. They don't wait to understand anything before reacting. And that's the whole point. They go straight to something's off and behave like it's already confirmed. Aries just hates feeling behind, so they flip into confrontation mode, which is their basic mode basically, because they want to try to get ahead again, even and especially if the confrontation is built on absolutely nothing. So they'll question you with that irritated impatience. What they're basically saying is, fix my ego right now. And if you hesitate, they take it as a proof that their paranoia was absolutely justified. They will swear they're being reasonable. But with them, jealousy always escalates into performance. So the second they think someone else might outshine them, they start acting like they have something to prove. And guess what? They'll do it right in front of you. So they'll suddenly become louder, bolder, more dramatic, if that's possible, and they'll throw themselves into whatever makes them feel superior again. So if someone else dares to catch your attention, Aries tries to drown that person out through sheer force of personality. They will posture, they will brag, they will flirt harder with you, or they will flirt harder with someone else. They'll do basically anything that makes them feel like they reclaimed emotional dominance. And even when they're performing for you, they're pretending they're doing it naturally. Like all of it, it's not painfully obvious. Because Aries wants you to think that they're above competition. But jealousy exposes that they're addicted to winning it. And yes, there's another thing with Aries, and that's retaliation. Exactly the part they swear they never stoop to, even though they do it every single time. Because the moment they get jealous, they suddenly find ways to trigger your attention, to push your buttons, or to remind you that they are desirable. And all of this is not because they stopped caring for you, but because jealousy makes them feel like they need to strike back. They'll flirt with someone within your line of sight. They'll talk to someone a little too enthusiastically, or they'll act like they're perfectly fine without you, all the while watching you for the reaction that reassures them that they still matter because it is super important for them. And the way they try to force their reassurance, it's not subtle at all, because nothing is subtle with Aries. Contradictions are endless. Aries will tell you they're not jealous or behaving like you just betrayed some sacred crazy oath. They'll accuse you of hiding things. They'll demand loyalty without giving you the emotional stability that loyalty actually requires. So they'll oscillate between wanting to pull you close and wanting to push you away. Because you see, pride blinds them faster than anything else. And the spiral always ends the same way. After all the noise, all the accusations, all the dramatic posturing, Aries crashes into that irritated silence they used to pretend nothing happened. So they'll act normal again, like the entire ego meltdown wasn't so painfully obvious. And Aries being Aries, they'll expect you to move on immediately because they already decided the emotional balance has been restored, even if you're still processing the chaos they unleashed. So basically, Aries gets jealous, they react, they fight for emotional position, and then they flip the switch back to I'm fine. Because they basically don't want to acknowledge the impact of their behavior and admit how deeply jealousy actually rattles them. Now, what's interesting is that Aries never notices just how fast their jealousy pushes the other person into a state of constant alertness, because the shift in Aries is so sudden and it's so blunt that you don't even get the time to understand anything before they're already adjusting themselves. So the second Aries reacts, you start paying attention to their tone, their pacing, their questions, their irritation. And then you begin to filter normal behavior just to avoid setting off another crazy flare. And yeah, Aries will act like all of this is completely natural, as if you're the one who just knows how to keep the peace. And that's exactly the part Aries refuses to acknowledge. You start carrying the responsibility for Aries' emotional stability because Aries won't admit they need reassurance, but they will behave as if you're obligated to give it constantly. So it becomes your job to manage clarity, to manage communication, transparency, like every small detail, so Aries doesn't spiral into another accusatory episode. They will say that they're reacting only to something very specific, but you know better. And you know what? Over time, trust starts to erode. You can't have an honest exchange when Aries interprets pretty much everything through a defensive lens. You can't feel relaxed when you're aware that Aries might snap again over something that basically didn't mean anything. You can't communicate naturally when you have to edit yourself constantly and when you have to kind of predict how they'll twist your words. And you see, Aries thinks jealousy proves loyalty, but the partner who didn't do anything wrong experiences it as instability. So it's a pattern when they're punished for things they didn't do, and then they're expected to pretend the punishment never even happened. So you become the one who reassures, who explains, who accommodates. Well, Aries gets to act like their reactions are completely justified simply because they felt something. They will frame their demands as straightforward communication, but in practice, it's the partner adjusting their entire approach to avoid stepping on Aries' toes, or better said, pride. So their jealousy doesn't just disrupt their very particular moment, it restructures the whole relationship around their own ego, and you're the one who ends up carrying the cost, while Aries insists they were just being honest. Because Aries never sees jealousy as their own insecurity. They treat it like a reaction you should accommodate without question. And that is exactly why their patterns repeat. They move on the moment their ego feels stable again, while everyone around them is still dealing with the impact. And yeah, Aries will call it passion, but we all know it's just their ego, pride, and jealousy.